The Bentley, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, was speeding through the rain and suddenly slammed on the brakes. Inside the car, the elderly billionaire tightened his grip on the steering wheel as the headlights revealed a black man straining to shield his wife and his feverish young daughter, the child trembling and clutching a torn stuffed rabbit in complete exhaustion. Every ounce of reason told him not to get involved, but he opened the car door and brought them inside, completely unaware that this single decision would not only save a family but also expose a betrayal worth millions of dollars and change his life forever. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. A relentless storm lashed against the windshield of his custom-built Bentley Continental GT as Jonathan Pierce drove through the dark Georgia night. Jonathan Pierce, a 64-year-old billionaire with silver hair and hands that had signed more acquisition papers than he could count, gripped the steering wheel with surprising force for a man who usually had drivers handle such tasks. The roar of the luxury engine and the rhythmic sweep of the wipers were his only companions on this forgotten back road through rural Georgia, miles away from the private jets and boardrooms that defined his existence. Jonathan preferred driving alone at night when business took him through the South. The darkness concealed the poverty he'd rather not acknowledge and allowed him solitude with thoughts that had grown darker since his wife Margaret's death 7 years ago. He'd buried himself in work, expanding Pierce Global Industries until his net worth exceeded $8 billion, but money couldn't fill the void in his Atlanta penthouse or erase the silence that greeted him every evening. He was returning from a factory inspection in Alabama, choosing the scenic route to delay his arrival at another empty mansion. The torrential downpour forced him to slow the powerful vehicle to a crawl, his jaw clenched with irritation at the delay. Suddenly, the high-intensity headlights cut through the darkness, revealing something that made Jonathan's heart stutter. About 200 yards ahead on the narrow shoulder, barely visible through the sheets of rain, were silhouettes. 3 figures walking single file, completely drenched, fighting against wind that threatened to sweep them into the road. Jonathan's first instinct, honed by years of caution in business, screamed danger. His right foot remained steady on the accelerator. He'd heard stories about highway robberies, elaborate schemes to target wealthy travelers. The world was full of people looking for handouts, and he'd learned long ago that most sob stories were just well-rehearsed performances designed to separate fools from their money. However, as the Bentley roared closer, the headlights illuminated a detail that shattered his defensive logic. The smallest figure, a child who couldn't be more than 7 years old, turned toward the approaching car. The girl didn't wave or signal for help. She simply stared into the blinding lights with an expression of absolute exhaustion, one small hand clutching her mother's coat while the other held a tattered stuffed rabbit. Jonathan saw that face for just a split second, but it was enough. Something about the child's quiet desperation, the way she didn't even beg, just endured, sent a jolt through his chest that felt uncomfortably like the grief he'd buried with Margaret. He cursed loudly, his deep voice echoing in the leather interior, and slammed his palm against the steering wheel. His foot moved to the brake pedal almost against his will. The Bentley's advanced braking system engaged smoothly, bringing the $150,000 vehicle to a controlled stop about 40 yards past the family. Jonathan sat motionless for a long moment, hands still gripping the wheel, debating whether he'd just made the biggest mistake of the night or the best decision in 7 years. Through the rearview mirror, he watched the adult figure running toward his car, and every instinct told him to drive away. But he didn't. He lowered the passenger window just 3 inches, keeping the engine running and his hand near the gear shift, ready to accelerate if he saw any weapon or suspicious movement. Through the side mirror, he observed as a man approached the car, leaving the woman and child standing back in the rain. When the man reached the window, Jonathan saw a face carved by desperation and exhaustion. He was young, perhaps 34, but his features were etched with lines that spoke of hardship far beyond his years. Rain streamed down his dark skin, mixing with what looked unmistakably like tears. "Sir, please." The man shouted over the roar of the storm, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm not asking for money. I don't want anything from you. My wife and daughter, they can't walk anymore. My little girl is burning up with fever. Just take us to the next town with shelter. I'm begging you by everything holy in this world." There was no threat in his voice, no hint of deception, just the raw, broken plea of a father who had failed to protect his family and knew it. Jonathan unlocked the passenger door with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of his entire isolated existence. "Get in quickly," he commanded in a gravelly voice roughened by years of boardroom battles. The man, whose name was Marcus, signaled frantically to his family. The woman ran forward with the child, and Jonathan watched as they struggled to climb into the high luxury vehicle. Their clothes were soaked through, their shoes caked in mud, and they brought the smell of desperation into his pristine car. The woman, named Keisha, settled into the passenger seat with their daughter Naomi cradled in her lap, wrapping the child in her own wet jacket, as if that could somehow provide warmth. Marcus crammed himself into the limited back space of the sports car, his large frame awkward and uncomfortable in the leather seat designed for show rather than practicality. Jonathan cranked the heat to maximum and merged back onto the black road. The silence in the car was suffocating, broken only by the climate control system and the sound of Naomi's labored breathing. Jonathan could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of gratitude and fear radiating from his passengers. He glanced at them through the rearview mirror and side vision. These weren't con artists or criminals. These were desperate people who'd been pushed to the absolute edge, and something about their quiet dignity reminded him of things he'd spent years trying to forget. "There's water in the console and protein bars in the glove compartment," Jonathan said gruffly, his voice devoid of warmth but not unkind. "Help yourselves." Marcus reached for the supplies like they were precious treasures, but he didn't take anything for himself first. With trembling hands, he opened a water bottle and held it to his wife's lips, then carefully helped his daughter take small sips. Only after his family had drunk did he allow himself a few swallows. Jonathan watched this small act through the mirror, and despite himself, felt a flicker of respect. In his world of corporate raiders and opportunists, selflessness was rarer than platinum. Yet here was a man with nothing putting his family first with the same certainty that the sun would rise. "Where were you headed on a night like this?" Jonathan asked, finally breaking the tension. Marcus cleared his throat, his voice hoarse from the rain and shouting over the storm. "We were walking to Millbrook, sir. It's about 140 miles north." Jonathan's eyebrows rose in disbelief. 140 miles? You'd be dead from exposure before you covered 20. Marcus lowered his gaze, shame coloring his exhausted features. "I know, sir, but we were evicted this morning from our rental. Landlord sold the property to developers. We have no car, no money for bus fare. My brother said there might be work in Millbrook at the processing plant. We had nowhere else to go but forward." The stark honesty of the situation landed like a punch to Jonathan's gut. This wasn't a theatrical tragedy. It was the quiet bureaucratic cruelty of poverty where human beings became disposable the moment they couldn't pay rent. Keisha spoke for the first time, her voice soft and melodic despite the tremor of fear and cold. "We told Naomi it was an adventure, that we were pioneers walking to a new home like the old days. But she knew. Children always know when their parents are scared." She stroked her daughter's damp hair, and Naomi whimpered softly in her feverish sleep, clutching the bedraggled stuffed rabbit closer to her chest. Jonathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He thought of his own daughter Emily, whom he barely spoke to anymore after a bitter argument about his obsession with work. Emily had accused him of choosing money over family, of letting his grief over Margaret turn him into a cold, calculating machine. They hadn't spoken in 3 years. The presence of this family in his car acted like an uncomfortable mirror, reflecting his own emotional bankruptcy against their material poverty. They had nothing but each other. He had billions and no one. The rain began to ease, transitioning to a steady drizzle as dawn approached. Jonathan knew his route passed within 30 miles of Millbrook, but dropping this family at the town entrance in the early morning hours wouldn't solve anything. They'd still be on the street, wet and homeless, with a sick child. An idea began forming in his mind, something completely out of character that went against every principle of self-preservation he'd developed over decades in ruthless business. He studied Marcus through the mirror, noting the worn canvas bag the man clutched like it contained everything he owned, which it probably did. "What kind of work did you do before?" Jonathan asked, his tone sharp and assessing. "Before you lost your housing?" Marcus lifted his head, surprised by the question. "I was a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing facility, sir. I handled equipment repairs, facility management, electrical systems. I can fix just about anything mechanical or structural. Learned it all from my father, who was a master electrician. Jonathan nodded slowly, filing away this information like pieces of a business proposition he wasn't yet ready to fully acknowledge. The luxury car continued devouring miles in the darkness, but the atmosphere inside had shifted subtly. It was no longer just a temporary refuge from the storm. It had become a space where two very different worlds collided, where the distance between $8 billion and absolute poverty measured not in money but in humanity. Jonathan remained silent for another 30 miles, his mind working through calculations that had nothing to do with stock portfolios or acquisition targets. He glanced again at the family huddled in his car. Naomi had stopped shivering thanks to the heat, her fever-flushed face peaceful in exhausted sleep. Keisha held her daughter with such fierce protective love that it made Jonathan's chest ache with memories of Margaret holding Emily the same way. Marcus sat in the back, trying to make himself as small as possible, clearly uncomfortable in these opulent surroundings. His eyes kept darting to the leather interior, the high-tech dashboard, the subtle luxury that probably cost more than he'd earned in 5 years. "There's a truck stop ahead, called Miller's Rest," Jonathan announced, breaking the silence. "We're stopping there." Marcus tensed immediately. "Sir, we don't have money to buy anything. We'll wait in the car while you take your break. We'll keep an eye on your vehicle." The humility in Marcus's voice was painful to hear. He'd been conditioned to believe his place was outside while people with money lived their lives inside. Jonathan shook his head firmly. "Nobody waits in my car like they're hired security. If I eat, my passengers eat. That's non-negotiable. Besides, your daughter needs food and your wife needs to warm up properly. Don't argue with me on this." He pulled the Bentley into the truck stop parking lot as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. The fluorescent lights of Miller's Rest glowed against the remaining darkness, and the smell of coffee and bacon grease drifted through the air. As they entered the diner, heads turned. The sight was jarring. Jonathan Pierce in his expensive tailored suit despite the casual drive, followed by a bedraggled family that looked like they'd crawled out of a disaster zone. Mud-caked shoes, soaked clothes, a feverish child, and the unmistakable smell of desperation. Jonathan walked with his head held high, his bearing radiating the confidence of a man who'd faced down hostile board members and corporate sharks. His expression dared anyone to comment. He chose a corner booth and gestured for them to sit. A weathered waitress named Betty approached with a pot of coffee and a notepad. She'd worked at Miller's Rest for 23 years and had seen every kind of human drama play out in these booths. She looked at the family, then at Jonathan, and her experienced eyes understood the situation immediately. "Coffee for you, Mr. Pierce?" she asked, recognition flickering across her face. Jonathan was known in these parts, though he rarely stopped at places like this anymore. "Coffee for me, Betty, and for them, I want your biggest breakfast special. 4 orders, eggs, bacon, pancakes, the works. Hot chocolate for the child and orange juice for everyone, whatever they need." Marcus tried to protest again, his pride wounded by accepting charity. But Jonathan raised a hand to silence him, his expression hardening into the look that had intimidated countless executives. "Marcus, pride is something only people with full stomachs can afford. Your daughter is sick and your family is starving. Swallow your pride for one meal and let them eat. Tomorrow you can worry about repaying it. Today you focus on keeping your family alive." The bluntness of the words, delivered without judgment but with absolute authority, silenced Marcus's objections. He nodded slowly, whispering a thank you that sounded more like a prayer. When the food arrived, Jonathan watched rather than eating his own breakfast. He observed Naomi's eyes widen at the sight of pancakes with syrup, how Marcus and Keisha instinctively gave their daughter the best portions before taking anything for themselves. They ate with controlled hunger, using manners despite their desperation, wiping their plates clean with toast until nothing remained. Betty refilled coffee cups and gave Jonathan a knowing nod that said she understood what he was doing, even if she didn't know why. Jonathan pushed his own untouched plate toward Marcus. "I'm not hungry. Finish this before it gets cold." The simple act of sharing food at a table, something Jonathan hadn't done with anyone in years, felt strangely intimate. He realized he'd been living like a ghost, haunting his own life rather than participating in it. As Marcus ate, Jonathan made his decision. But he needed to be careful. Years of business dealings had taught him that desperation made people say whatever they thought you wanted to hear. He needed to verify Marcus's claims before making an offer that could either change lives or blow up in his face. "You said you handled facility management and repairs," Jonathan commented as they finished eating. "Electrical systems, structural maintenance, what else?" Marcus straightened slightly, sensing this was more than casual conversation. "I'm certified in HVAC, industrial electrical, plumbing and general construction, sir. I supervised a maintenance team of 8 people for 6 years before the plant automated and downsized. I can read blueprints, manage contractors, handle emergency repairs." Jonathan's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Tell me about the most difficult repair you ever handled." Marcus thought for a moment. "We had a cooling system failure in the middle of summer production rush. 3 outside contractors couldn't diagnose it. Everyone said we needed to replace the whole system, $500,000. But I studied the schematics for 2 days straight, and I realized the problem wasn't the compressor like they thought. It was a relay failure in the control board that only showed up under specific load conditions. Cost $400 to fix." The specificity of the answer, the technical details delivered without showboating, impressed Jonathan. This wasn't someone exaggerating credentials. This was genuine expertise. But Jonathan needed more than words. He glanced around the diner and noticed a trucker at the counter, complaining loudly to Betty about his rig. "Been to 4 mechanics in 3 states, the man was saying. They all hook up their fancy computers, charge me $200, and tell me they can't find anything wrong. But I know something's wrong. Lights flicker, dashboard dims, then everything comes back. Happens random, maybe once every 50 miles. An idea formed in Jonathan's mind. A real test, not a hypothetical question. He stood and walked to the counter. "Excuse me, sir, I couldn't help but overhear. My name is Jonathan Pierce. This gentleman here," he gestured to Marcus, "is a facilities maintenance specialist with electrical certification. Would you mind if he took a look at your truck? No charge, just professional curiosity." The trucker, a weathered man named Dale, sized up Marcus skeptically. A black man in soaking wet clothes didn't exactly inspire confidence, but he was desperate enough to try anything. "Sure, why not? Every certified mechanic from here to Nashville has already failed. Can't get worse." Outside in the parking lot, Jonathan hung back and watched. This was the real test, not what Marcus said he could do, but what he actually could do when put on the spot. Marcus asked Dale to describe the symptoms in detail. Jonathan noted how Marcus listened carefully, asking clarifying questions rather than immediately diving under the hood like he had all the answers, and the mechanics checked. Marcus prompted. "Alternator, battery, all the fuses, the main harness connections, ground connections, everything." Dale confirmed. They hooked up diagnostic equipment and sat there for 2 hours. Nothing showed up. "Can you start the engine?" Marcus asked. Dale climbed into the cab and fired up the diesel. The truck rumbled to life, instrument panel glowing normally. Marcus didn't immediately start tearing into the engine compartment. Instead he stood still for almost a full minute, just listening. Then he walked slowly around the entire truck, looking at details others might miss. Jonathan watched this methodical approach with growing respect. Marcus wasn't grandstanding or pretending to know more than he did. He was actually thinking, analyzing, approaching the problem systematically. After what felt like 10 minutes, Marcus asked Dale to turn on various systems while the engine idled. Lights, radio, air conditioning. Everything functioned normally. "Now give it some throttle," Marcus instructed. "Rev it up to about 1500 RPM. Dale did. Still nothing unusual. "Okay," Marcus said, and Jonathan could hear uncertainty in his voice. Good. It meant he wasn't faking confidence. "Turn on your high beams and your CB radio at the same time." Dale flipped the switches. Instantly the running lights flickered, the dashboard dimmed, and the radio crackled with static. 30 seconds later, everything normalized. "There it is," Dale exclaimed. "That's exactly what happens on the road." Marcus nodded slowly, but Jonathan noticed he didn't immediately claim to know the answer. Instead Marcus asked Dale to pop the hood and side access panel, then spent another 15 minutes carefully tracing wire harnesses, checking connections that looked perfectly fine to the untrained eye. Finally, He stopped at a junction box mounted on the frame rail near the battery. "I think I found it," Marcus said, but his tone was cautious, not cocky. "This junction box houses the relay that manages power distribution. I believe the relay inside is failing, but only under specific load combinations." He pointed to the box and explained his reasoning to Dale, who listened intently. "How much to fix it?" Dale asked. "The relay costs about $45. Any auto parts store will have it. Takes maybe 10 minutes to replace." Marcus paused. "But sir, I should be honest. I'm about 80% sure that's your problem. There's a 20% chance it's something else in the circuit. If you replace the relay, and it doesn't fix it, the next thing to check would be." He went on to give Dale a backup diagnosis plan, showing he understood the limitations of his conclusion. Dale was impressed. "Son, 3 mechanics told me they were 100% sure they couldn't find anything. And you're the first honest enough to admit you might be wrong. That actually makes me trust you more. Thank you." He pulled out his wallet, but Marcus shook his head. "No sir, I didn't fix anything. I just looked at it." "You gave me more information than anyone else has," Dale insisted. "Take something." Marcus glanced at Jonathan, uncertain. Jonathan remained silent, letting Marcus make his own choice. "I appreciate it sir, but no thank you," Marcus said finally. "If the relay fixes it, you'll know I was right. That's payment enough." As they walked back to the Bentley, Jonathan was quiet. The test had revealed multiple things. Marcus had real skills, but he wasn't overconfident. He was honest about uncertainty. He could think systematically under pressure, and when offered payment for 5 minutes of looking at a truck, he'd refused it even though he was desperate. But Jonathan had learned long ago not to make major decisions based on single moments. People could perform well once and fail consistently. He needed time to really know if Marcus was who he appeared to be. "That was solid diagnostic work," Jonathan said as they reached the car. "You didn't oversell your conclusion. That shows integrity." Marcus looked uncertain, like he couldn't tell if he'd passed or failed some invisible test. Jonathan made a decision, but a measured one. "Marcus, I have a property about 2 hours north of here called Willow Springs. It's a large estate that needs facilities management. I've been without a director for 8 months, and it's showing. I'm going to make you an offer, but I need you to understand something first." He held Marcus's gaze. "I don't do this lightly. I've been successful by being careful, by verifying everything. What you just did showed me you have real skills and honest character, but I don't know you. Not really. So here's my offer, come to Willow Springs. I'll give you temporary housing for your family, and a 2-week paid trial. You'll work with me directly, and I'll evaluate whether this is the right fit. At the end of 2 weeks, we'll decide together if we want to continue. If we do, I'll offer you a permanent position. If not, I'll give you a month's pay, and help you find something else. Fair?" It was a careful offer, generous enough to be meaningful, but protected enough that Jonathan wasn't risking everything on a stranger. Marcus looked at Keisha, who'd been listening through the car window. She nodded slowly. "More than fair, sir," Marcus said, extending his hand. "You won't regret giving us this chance." "I hope not," Jonathan replied honestly. "But understand something, Marcus, this isn't charity. I expect real work. And I'll be watching carefully to make sure you're who you appear to be." As they climbed into the Bentley for the continuation of their journey, Keisha whispered to Naomi, "Remember this morning, baby, sometimes people give you chances, and you have to prove you deserve them by working hard." Naomi, her fever finally breaking, nodded solemnly. Jonathan overheard this quiet lesson, and felt cautiously optimistic, but he'd been burned before by trusting too quickly. This time, he'd verify everything before fully committing. The sign for Millbrook appeared and passed by. Marcus watched it in the rearview mirror with mixed feelings, but said nothing. He was too afraid this opportunity might evaporate if he questioned anything. As the Bentley headed north toward Willow Springs, Jonathan made a mental note to conduct a background check on Marcus, verify his certifications, and watch every move carefully during the trial period. Kindness was one thing, stupidity was another. He'd learn which this was over the next 2 weeks. The sun was fully risen when the Bentley turned off the main highway onto a private road marked only by a discreet stone marker reading Pierce Estate, private property. The paved drive wound through ancient oak trees and manicured lawns that stretched as far as the eye could see. Marcus and Keisha pressed their faces to the windows, stunned by the scale of the property. They passed a gatehouse that looked larger than their former rental, a pristine stable building, and what appeared to be a greenhouse complex before the main house came into view. The Pierce Estate mansion was a stunning example of antebellum architecture, a massive white structure with tall columns, wraparound porches, and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the morning light. But despite its grandeur, there was something melancholy about it. Some of the gardens were overgrown, paint was peeling on the outbuildings, and an air of neglect hung over the property like a shroud. "Welcome to Willow Springs," Jonathan announced, parking the Bentley in a circular drive in front of the main house. Naomi woke up, rubbed her eyes, and gasped at the sight of the enormous building. "Mama, is this a museum?" "No, baby," Keisha whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know what this is." They climbed out of the car stiffly, their bodies aching from the long night. The air smelled of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass, and birds sang in the oak trees. It was breathtakingly beautiful and utterly intimidating. Jonathan led them up the front steps and through a heavy oak door that opened into a two-story entrance hall with a crystal chandelier and a sweeping staircase. The interior was furnished with priceless antiques, but like the exterior, everything felt frozen in time, waiting for life to return. "The house has 23 rooms," Jonathan explained as he walked them through, his tone businesslike. "Most of them haven't been used in years. The West Wing has a 3-bedroom staff apartment that was built for the estate manager. That's where you'll stay during the trial period. It has its own entrance, full kitchen, living area." He showed them to the apartment, which was larger and more luxurious than anywhere they'd ever lived. The furniture was covered in sheets, dust coating every surface. "It hasn't been used in 8 months, Jonathan said bluntly. "You'll need to clean it yourselves. Cleaning supplies are in the utility closet. There are linens in the bedroom closets. Take today to settle in and recover. Tomorrow morning, Marcus, I want you in my study at 7 a.m. sharp. We'll discuss your responsibilities and my expectations." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. The apartment door locks from the inside. Use it. We don't know each other yet, and until we do, maintaining appropriate boundaries is important. I'm giving you shelter and an opportunity. You're giving me 2 weeks of work. Let's both be professional about this arrangement." The words, while not unkind, established clear distance. This wasn't a rescue fantasy where they'd all become instant family. This was a business arrangement, carefully structured and cautiously executed. After Jonathan left, Marcus and Keisha stood in the dusty apartment, looking at each other with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "He doesn't trust us," Keisha said quietly. "Would you?" Marcus replied. "We're strangers he picked up on a highway. He's being smart. We need to prove ourselves." They spent the next several hours cleaning the apartment, finding sheets and towels, making it livable. Keisha gave Naomi a proper bath in the enormous marble bathroom, washing away 2 days of fear and desperation. Marcus found cleaning supplies and attacked the dust with methodical determination. By evening the apartment was clean and comfortable. They found a note on the kitchen counter in neat handwriting. "Groceries delivered at 6 p.m. Basic supplies to get you started. Keep receipts for anything additional you need." Gepi. The groceries arrived precisely at 6, delivered by a local service. Basic staples, nothing fancy, but more food than they'd seen in weeks. There was also a box of children's clothes in Naomi's size, practical and simple, and some basic clothing items for Marcus and Keisha. "He's being generous," Keisha said as she put away the groceries. "But careful." "Smart," Marcus corrected. "I'd do the same thing if I was him." That night they ate a simple meal in their new temporary home, Naomi between them at the small kitchen table. The apartment was quiet, almost too quiet after months of noisy motels and crowded shelters. "Daddy, are we going to stay here?" Naomi asked. Marcus chose his words carefully. "For 2 weeks for sure, baby. After that we'll see. We have to work very hard and show Mr. Pierce we're trustworthy people. Can you be on your very best behavior?" Naomi nodded seriously. "I'll be so good he won't even know I'm here." Marcus kissed her forehead. "You don't have to be invisible, sweetheart. Just be yourself, be polite, and let Mama and Daddy handle the grown-up stuff." They fell asleep that night in a real bed, clean and safe, but with the knowledge that this was temporary until proven otherwise. The next morning, Marcus presented himself at Jonathan's study at 6:55 a.m., determined to never be late. Jonathan looked up from his desk, noting the punctuality. "Good, sit down." Marcus sat in the leather chair across from the massive desk, feeling small and out of place. Jonathan pulled out a thick folder. "I had my attorney run a background check on you last night. Standard procedure for any new employee, especially one who'll have access to my property." Marcus felt his stomach drop. He'd been arrested once 12 years ago for a bar fight that wasn't his fault but had landed him in jail overnight anyway. The charges were dropped, but it was on his record. "I know about the arrest," Jonathan continued. "I also know the charges were dismissed and the police report indicates you were actually trying to break up the fight, not start it. I'm not concerned about that." Marcus exhaled in relief. "What I am concerned about," Jonathan continued, "is whether your skills match what you claimed. Your previous employer confirmed you were an excellent maintenance supervisor, terminated only due to downsizing. Your certifications are all current and valid. That's good, but references and certifications don't tell me everything. Performance does." He pulled out a second folder, this one filled with photographs, documents and spreadsheets. "This is a complete assessment of every building on this property, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Over the next 2 weeks I want you to conduct your own independent assessment. Walk every structure, document every issue, tell me what you find. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me the truth." Jonathan's eyes were hard and assessing. "I'm going to spot check your findings against reports from contractors I've had out here. If your assessment matches theirs, I'll know you're competent. If you miss major issues or exaggerate minor ones, I'll know you're either incompetent or dishonest. Either way, the trial ends." "I understand, sir," Marcus said. "Do you?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Marcus, I want you to succeed. I genuinely do. But I've been lied to, stolen from, and manipulated by people who seem trustworthy. I'm not going to let that happen again just because I feel sorry for your circumstances. You need to earn my trust through consistent, honest performance. Nothing less will do." The bluntness was jarring, but Marcus appreciated it. At least he knew exactly where he stood. "I'll give you honest work, sir. That's all I can promise." Jonathan nodded and handed him a ring of keys. "These open every building except the main house. You'll work independently. I'll check in periodically. If you need me, I'm in this study most mornings. Or you can call my cell. The number is on this card." Over the next 2 weeks Marcus worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He walked every building, documenting issues with photographs and detailed notes. The greenhouse's climate control system was failing. The stable's electrical wiring was outdated. The pool house had foundation cracks. The irrigation system leaked. The security system was obsolete. But Marcus also noted things that were working well, systems that had been well maintained, structural integrity that was solid. He didn't exaggerate problems to make himself look necessary. He reported what he found, honestly and completely. Jonathan checked his work frequently. He'd show up unannounced, ask Marcus to explain findings, then compare them against contractor assessments. Every time Marcus's observations matched or exceeded the professional's reports. But Jonathan also watched for other things. Did Marcus show up on time? Yes, always 15 minutes early. Did he cut corners? No, his work was thorough. Did he respect boundaries? Yes, he never entered the main house uninvited or asked inappropriate questions. Did he handle equipment carefully? Yes, he treated everything like it was his own. On the 10th day, Jonathan conducted his own test. He accidentally left a $100 bill on a workbench in the stable where Marcus was examining the electrical panel. He watched from a hidden vantage point to see what Marcus would do. Marcus found the bill within minutes. He looked around, saw no one, then picked it up and examined it. For a long moment he stood there, clearly conflicted. $100 would make a significant difference to his family. Then Marcus folded the bill carefully and walked directly to the main house, knocking on the study door. "Sir, I found this in the stable. I thought you should know in case you were looking for it." Jonathan took the bill, his face revealing nothing. "Thank you, Marcus. I must have dropped it this morning." After Marcus left, Jonathan made a note in his evaluation file. Personal integrity verified under temptation. Meanwhile, Keisha was conducting her own careful navigation of the estate. Jonathan had been clear that she wasn't hired, only allowed to stay during Marcus's trial. But the main house was deteriorating, and Keisha couldn't help noticing it. On the 5th day she gathered her courage and knocked on the study door. "Mr. Pierce, may I speak with you?" Jonathan looked up, surprised. Keisha had been almost invisible since their arrival, staying in the apartment with Naomi, asking for nothing. "Of course, come in." Keisha entered nervously, her hands twisting together. "Sir, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but I've noticed the main house needs attention. I was a housekeeper for 6 years before Naomi was born, and then I worked cleaning motels after that. I understand if you don't want me in your house, but if you'd permit it, I'd like to clean and organize during our time here. Not for pay, just, it seems wrong to let such a beautiful place deteriorate." Jonathan studied her carefully. This wasn't someone angling for a job. This was genuine distress at seeing beautiful things neglected. "You don't need to work for free, Keisha. I want to," she said softly. "You're giving my family a chance. This is my way of saying thank you properly." Jonathan considered this. Having someone in his house was uncomfortable, but the place was falling apart from neglect, and his rotating cleaning service was both expensive and careless. "If you want to help, I won't stop you," he said finally. "But maintain boundaries, don't go through personal items, don't rearrange things without asking, and understand that this doesn't guarantee anything beyond the 2-week trial." "I understand, sir, thank you." Over the next week, Keisha began carefully restoring order to the main house. She started with public spaces, the entrance hall, the living room, the dining room. She cleaned with meticulous care, treating every antique like it was priceless, because it probably was. Jonathan would find her working and watch from a distance. She didn't snoop, she didn't gossip on her phone, she just worked quietly and competently, bringing life back to dead spaces. On the 13th day of the trial, Jonathan called Marcus and Keisha to his study together. They arrived nervous, uncertain if they'd passed or failed. "Sit down," Jonathan instructed. He opened his evaluation folder. "Marcus, over the past 2 weeks you've demonstrated technical competence that equals or exceeds professional contractors. You've been punctual, thorough, and honest. You've respected boundaries and maintained appropriate professionalism. You've also demonstrated personal integrity in several situations where dishonesty would have benefited you." He paused. "I'm satisfied that you're who you claim to be." Marcus felt relief wash through him. However, Jonathan continued, "I'm not ready to make this permanent yet. I want to extend the trial for another month. Same terms, but expanded responsibilities. I want you to start actually managing repairs, not just documenting them. Hire contractors, oversee work, manage budgets, show me you can handle the full scope of the director position." He turned to Keisha. "And Keisha, I'd like to offer you a formal part-time position. 15 hours per week, housekeeping and light household management. The pay is modest, but it comes with the housing arrangement and lets you contribute while still having time for Naomi." "We'll take it," Marcus said quickly. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Jonathan replied. "You're still on trial. I'm just extending the evaluation period because I need more data. Continue performing well, and we'll discuss permanency. But understand that I'm watching everything carefully. One major mistake, one breach of trust, and this ends immediately." After they left, Jonathan sat alone in his study, feeling conflicted. Part of him wanted to simply trust them, to believe in the goodness he'd seen. But decades of business had taught him that people revealed their true nature slowly, over time, under pressure. He'd give them rope, either they'd use it to build something, or they'd hang themselves with it. Only time would tell which. 6 months after the first storm, the transformation of Willow Springs was visible but incomplete. Marcus had thrown himself into the work with relentless dedication, but progress came with challenges Jonathan carefully observed. The extended trial period revealed what the first 2 weeks couldn't. Marcus made mistakes. In the second month, Marcus hired a roofing contractor who seemed professional but cut corners. Jonathan caught the substandard work during an inspection, and confronted Marcus in the stable workshop. "Walk me through how you vetted this contractor," Jonathan said, his tone sharp. Marcus's face flushed with embarrassment. I checked references, verified licensing, compared bids. He had good reviews online and came in under budget. Did you check his work on site at previous jobs? No sir, I trusted the references. References can be faked, reviews can be bought. In business, Marcus, trust is earned through verification, not through what people tell you. Jonathan's voice wasn't kind, but it was educational. You cost me $12,000 in repairs that now have to be redone properly. That comes out of your performance evaluation. Marcus took the criticism without excuses. I understand, sir. It won't happen again. Make sure it doesn't. The next contractor Marcus hired, he personally visited 3 of their job sites first, speaking to clients directly. The work was impeccable, Jonathan noticed but said nothing, simply making notes. In the 3rd month, Marcus misread electrical schematics and nearly created a fire hazard in the greenhouse renovation. Jonathan caught it during a spot inspection. You told me you could read blueprints, Jonathan said coldly. I can, sir. I misinterpreted the load calculations on this particular system. It's more complex than the commercial systems I worked with before. Then you should have said that up front. You should have hired an electrical engineer to verify your work. Confidence is good, Marcus. Overconfidence kills people. Marcus's voice shook. You're right. I was trying to save money and prove I could handle anything. That was stupid and dangerous. Yes, it was. Jonathan's eyes were hard. I'm not interested in what you can fake. I'm interested in what you can actually do safely and competently. When you're not sure, say so. I'd rather pay an expert than bury someone in a fire. Marcus hired an electrical engineer to review all his work on the greenhouse. The cost was significant, but the engineer found 2 other potential issues Marcus had missed. Jonathan's evaluation notes read, learning from mistakes, showing humility. Good sign. But mistakes weren't the only things Jonathan watched for. He observed how Marcus handled money, and what he saw impressed him. Marcus consistently found ways to save costs without sacrificing quality. He'd repair rather than replace when possible. He'd negotiate firmly with vendors. He maintained meticulous records of every penny spent, with receipts and invoices organized obsessively. In the 4th month, Jonathan gave Marcus a discretionary budget for supplies without requiring pre-approval. It was a test. Would Marcus abuse the freedom? At the end of the month, Marcus returned with detailed spreadsheets showing every purchase, every decision, every alternative considered. He'd come in 15% under budget and returned the unused funds. The remaining amount could roll over to next month's projects, Marcus explained, or return to the general estate account. Your choice, sir. Why didn't you just keep it and spend it on something? Jonathan asked bluntly. Marcus looked confused. Because it's not my money. I work for you, Mr. Pierce. I manage your resources. I don't own them. Jonathan nodded slowly. In his corporate world, discretionary budgets disappeared completely, used on executive perks and unnecessary expenses. Marcus treated every dollar like it mattered because someone had earned it. Keisha's integration into the household was more complicated than anyone expected, particularly for Keisha herself. She'd grown up in poverty, worked service jobs her entire life, and never spent significant time in spaces like Willow Springs. The opulence was overwhelming. She found herself afraid to touch things, worried she'd break something priceless. In her 2nd month, she accidentally knocked over a small vase while dusting. It shattered on the marble floor, and Keisha's heart stopped. She stood frozen, staring at the pieces, certain she'd just destroyed something worth more than she earned in a year. Jonathan heard the crash and came to investigate. He found Keisha on her knees crying while trying to pick up the pieces. I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'll pay for it. I don't know how, but I'll pay for it. Please don't fire Marcus because of my mistake. Jonathan looked at the broken vase, then at Keisha's terrified face. Something in her fear reminded him of things he'd forgotten about being human. Keisha, stop. It's a vase. It cost maybe $200, and I didn't even particularly like it. $200, Keisha whispered, horrified. To her that was groceries for a month. Things break, Jonathan said, his tone gentler than she'd heard before. That's why we have insurance. That's why we don't use the truly valuable pieces in everyday rooms. You're not fired. Marcus isn't fired. Clean it up and move on. He paused, seeing she was still shaking. Keisha, I need you to understand something. You're not a servant here, you're an employee, and employees make mistakes. The question isn't whether you'll break things occasionally, it's whether you'll be honest when it happens and learn from it. You were honest, we're fine. After he left, Keisha sat on the floor for a long time, trying to process working for someone who treated a $200 loss as inconsequential. The wealth gap was dizzying, but she learned. Over the months she became more confident in her work, more comfortable in the enormous house. She developed systems, created efficiency, and began to see past the intimidating luxury to the actual neglect underneath. One afternoon in the 5th month, she was organizing a storage room when she found boxes labeled Margaret's personal items and family photos. The boxes were covered in dust, shoved in a corner like they were being hidden. Keisha's instinct was to leave them alone. These were obviously painful memories, but she also noticed that the entire house lacked photographs, personal touches, any evidence that people had loved each other here. She sat with the dilemma for 3 days before finally gathering courage to knock on Jonathan's study door. Mr. Pierce, may I ask you something personal? Jonathan looked up warily. What is it? I found some boxes in the storage room. They're labeled with your wife's name. I didn't open them. But, sir, can I ask why they're hidden away? Jonathan's expression closed immediately. That's not your concern, Keisha. I know, sir. I'm sorry. She turned to leave, then stopped. It's just, my grandmother always said that hiding from memories doesn't make the pain less. It just makes the love less visible. The pain fades on its own time, but the love should stay where you can see it. She left quickly before he could respond, worried she'd overstepped terribly. Jonathan sat alone in his study for hours after that conversation, Keisha's words echoing in his head. Was that what he'd done? Hidden love while nursing pain. That night, for the first time in 7 years, Jonathan went to the storage room and opened the boxes. Photographs of Margaret smiling in her garden, pictures of Emily as a child, family Christmases and ordinary moments made precious by love. He'd convinced himself that removing these things protected him from grief, but Keisha was right. All he'd done was erase the evidence that he'd once been capable of love. The next morning, he found Keisha in the kitchen. The boxes in the storage room, would you help me go through them? Decide what should be displayed again. Keisha saw the vulnerability in his face and nodded gently. I'd be honored, sir. Over the next several weeks, they worked together to bring Margaret's presence back into the house. Photographs returned to mantles. Margaret's favorite throw blankets came out of storage. The house began feeling less like a museum, and more like a home that remembered being lived in. Jonathan didn't thank Keisha explicitly, but his evaluation notes read, unusual wisdom, sees what matters beyond just cleaning. By the 6th month, the dynamic at Willow Springs had shifted subtly. Jonathan still maintained professional distance, but it was less cold. He'd begun eating dinner in the dining room occasionally rather than alone in his study. Sometimes Marcus would give him updates on projects, and their conversations would drift into discussions about Margaret's garden design or Emily's childhood. The boundaries were still there, but they'd become less like walls and more like respectful space between people who were learning to trust each other. Jonathan called Marcus and Keisha to his study one evening exactly 6 months after that first storm. Sit down. They sat, nervous despite 6 months of generally positive interactions. Jonathan pulled out new contracts. I'm removing the trial status. These are permanent employment contracts. Marcus, your facilities director at $75,000 annually, full benefits, 2 weeks vacation. Keisha, your household manager at $25,000 for part-time work, same benefits package. He slid the contracts across the desk. You've both demonstrated competence, integrity and judgment over 6 months. You've made mistakes, but you've learned from them. You've been honest even when it cost you. You've respected boundaries while also showing genuine care for this property and what it represents. Jonathan paused, his expression softening slightly. I'm not going to pretend we're family. We're not. But you're good employees who've earned permanent positions. I hope you'll stay. Marcus picked up the contract with shaking hands. "Mr. Pierce, we'll stay as long as you'll have us. Thank you for believing in us enough to keep testing us." "I didn't believe in you," Jonathan corrected. "I verified you." "There's a difference. Belief is hope. Verification is evidence. You provided the evidence." After they left, Jonathan sat alone, allowing himself to acknowledge something he'd been denying. He was less lonely. The estate felt alive again in ways that had nothing to do with repairs or clean rooms. Maybe eventually, they could become something more than just employer and employees, but that would take time, more testing, more evidence. For now, this was enough. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 9 months after that first storm. Jonathan was in his study reviewing quarterly reports when his corporate attorney Richard Moss requested an urgent meeting. "We need to meet at Willow Springs," Richard said, his tone grave. "There's a situation that requires immediate attention. I'd prefer to discuss it away from the office." The request was unusual. Richard typically insisted on handling everything through formal channels in Atlanta. But Jonathan agreed, and Richard arrived at the estate that evening carrying a briefcase and an expression that set off Jonathan's instincts. They met in the study with the door closed. "Jonathan, I'm going to be direct," Richard began. "I've received information that concerns me deeply about your facilities director." Jonathan's posture stiffened immediately. "Explain." Richard opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. 3 months ago I received an anonymous tip suggesting we audit the estate accounts. I didn't want to alarm you until I had concrete information. The audit was completed last week." He spread papers across Jonathan's desk, bank statements, receipts, contractor invoices, all marked with highlighting and sticky notes. "Over the past 6 months, approximately $130,000 has been misappropriated from estate accounts. The money was moved through contractor payments and supply purchases that appear legitimate on surface. But when our auditors contacted these vendors, some of the invoices were problematic." Jonathan felt ice forming in his stomach, but his face remained neutral. "Show me specifically." Richard pulled out several highlighted invoices. "This contractor, Southern Restoration LLC, received $43,000 for roof repairs. When we called them, they confirmed they did work here but said the invoice amount was wrong. They were paid $43,000, but they only billed $38,000. The difference was $5,000. He pulled out more examples. This pattern repeats across multiple contractors. Small overcharges, usually between $2,000 and $8,000, spread across different vendors and different time periods. The cumulative total is significant. "And you believe Marcus is responsible for this?" Jonathan asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Look at the signature authorizations," Richard said. "Marcus has had complete control of estate finances since you hired him. He processes every payment, manages every contractor relationship, approves every purchase. And the timing of these discrepancies coincides exactly with when he gained financial access." Jonathan studied the documents, his business mind analyzing the patterns. The evidence looked damning, but something felt wrong. "Have you spoken to the contractors directly yourself, or did your auditors do it?" "The auditors handled the contractor interviews," Richard said. "That's standard procedure. I want the auditor reports, full transcripts of their conversations with each contractor." Richard hesitated. "Jonathan, that's unusual. You hire auditors precisely because you trust their professional assessment, and I'm hiring them to provide source documentation. Get me the full reports by tomorrow." After Richard left, Jonathan sat alone in his study staring at the documents. Everything in him wanted to believe Marcus was innocent. 6 months of observation had shown him a man of integrity, someone who returned unused budget funds and obsessively documented every penny. But he'd been wrong about people before, and the evidence Richard presented was compelling. He made a decision that went against his defensive instincts. He would investigate independently before taking any action. If Marcus was guilty, Jonathan would have proof. If Marcus was innocent, Jonathan needed to know who was actually stealing from him. By midnight, Jonathan had hired a different private investigation firm, one Richard Moss knew nothing about. He instructed them to conduct a comprehensive audit independent of Richard's findings,
to verify every claim, and to investigate the investigators. I want to know if my attorney's audit was competent, or if something else is going on. Jonathan explained. Trust no one. Verify everything. The investigators worked through the night and the following day. By Thursday evening, Jonathan had preliminary findings that made his blood run cold, but not for the reasons he'd expected. The discrepancies Richard's auditors found were accounting errors, not theft. When the independent investigators actually called the contractors themselves and reviewed bank records, they found that the invoices matched payments exactly. Richard's auditors had either been incompetent or deliberately misleading in their reports. More disturbing, when Jonathan's investigators looked into Richard Moss's law firm's billing practices, they found patterns of systematic overbilling that went back years. Phantom legal services, inflated hourly rates, charges for work never performed. The preliminary estimate of Richard's theft from Pierce Global Industries exceeded $2 million over 10 years. Jonathan sat in his study at 2 in the morning. The evidence of his attorney's betrayal spread before him, and felt a cold fury unlike anything he'd experienced in decades. Richard hadn't made accounting errors. He'd deliberately attempted to frame Marcus for embezzlement to distract from his own theft, and Jonathan had almost believed him. The realization of how close he'd come to destroying an innocent man made Jonathan physically ill. If he'd acted on Richard's evidence without independent verification, Marcus would be in jail right now. Keisha and Naomi would be on the street, an entire family destroyed because Jonathan trusted credentials and history over character and evidence. But Jonathan had learned something over the past 6 months. Trust required verification, and verification meant independent investigation. He called Marcus to the study at 7 a.m. Friday morning. Marcus arrived looking concerned, sensing trouble from the tense summons. "Sit down, Marcus." Marcus sat, fear evident on his face. "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need complete honesty," Jonathan said. "Have you taken any money from estate accounts that wasn't properly authorized for legitimate expenses?" The blood drained from Marcus's face completely. "No, sir, never. Every single purchase, every payment, every expenditure is documented with receipts and invoices. I've kept meticulous records because I never wanted anyone to question my integrity." His voice shook with hurt and fear. "Mr. Pierce, what's happened? Why are you asking me this?" Jonathan explained Richard's accusation, watching Marcus's face carefully. The shock and devastation were genuine, unmistakable. This wasn't the reaction of someone caught stealing. This was the devastation of someone falsely accused of violating the trust that meant everything to them. "Sir, I would never steal from you," Marcus said, tears forming in his eyes. "You gave my family everything when we had nothing. You trusted me when trust was the riskiest thing you could offer. I would rather die than betray that."
"I know," Jonathan said quietly, the certainty settling in his gut. "Marcus, the accusation was false. It was designed to be convincing, but it was fabricated by someone trying to cover his own crimes." He explained about Richard's actual embezzlement, about the independent investigation, about how close they'd both come to disaster. Marcus's hands were trembling. "If you'd trusted him instead of investigating yourself, I'd be in jail right now. My family would lose everything, again, and I'd be branded a thief. No one would ever hire me." That was exactly his plan, Jonathan confirmed grimly. "Richard was counting on me believing a respected attorney over someone I'd known less than a year. He was counting on prejudice and probability working against you." He paused. "But Richard underestimated 2 things. First, he underestimated how well I know you now. 6 months of watching how you handle money, how you make decisions, how you document everything obsessively. You've turned down opportunities to overbill. You've found ways to save money when it would have been easier to spend it. That's not the behavior of an embezzler." Jonathan's expression became hard. "Second, Richard underestimated how thoroughly I verify everything important. In business, I learned never to act on single-source information when stakes are high. I needed independent verification before I destroyed your life or trusted Richard's claims." "What happens now?" Marcus asked. "Now we set a trap. Richard thinks I'm going to act on his evidence. Instead, we're going to let him feel safe while we build an airtight case. But Marcus, this requires you to act normal, to continue working as if nothing's wrong. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Over the weekend, Jonathan coordinated with federal prosecutors and the FBI. Richard's embezzlement wasn't just from the estate, it was systematic corporate theft that triggered federal jurisdiction. On Monday morning, Richard returned to Willow Springs expecting to discuss Marcus's arrest. Instead, he found FBI agents waiting with a warrant for his arrest. "Richard, thank you for coming," Jonathan said with deadly calm as agents approached. "I took your advice and investigated the financial discrepancies thoroughly. You were absolutely right that money was being stolen. You were just wrong about who took it." Richard's confident expression froze as agents displayed their badges. "What is this, Jonathan?" "This is me applying the same thorough verification I use in all my business dealings," Jonathan replied coldly. "The same standard I should have applied to you years ago. The evidence of your theft is overwhelming, not just from the estate but from Pierce Global Industries. Over $2 million across 10 years. As the FBI arrested Richard, reading him his rights, Jonathan felt no satisfaction. Only anger that someone he'd trusted for over 2 decades had tried to destroy an innocent family to cover his own crimes. After Richard was taken away, Marcus stood on the front porch, shaking with the adrenaline of crisis barely averted. "I almost lost everything," he whispered. "If you hadn't investigated independently." "But I did," Jonathan interrupted. "Marcus, you've proven yourself to me every day for 6 months. Richard had credentials and history, but you had something more valuable: demonstrated character. When it mattered, I trusted what I'd seen with my own eyes over what someone told me on paper." He gripped Marcus's shoulder firmly. "Your integrity was tested in the worst possible way, and it held. Your reputation is intact because it was built on truth." Richard tried to exploit prejudice and presumption, but evidence mattered more. That evening, Jonathan gathered Marcus, Keisha, and Naomi in the main house dining room, the first time he'd invited them to eat there rather than their apartment. "I want to say something," Jonathan began. "What happened this week taught me something crucial. The world will always try to make us judge people by their packaging rather than their contents." Richard looked successful and trustworthy. Marcus looked like a risk. His voice grew thick with emotion. "But I've learned that real character reveals itself through consistent daily choices, not through credentials or appearance. Marcus has made the right choice every single day since I met him. Richard made the wrong choice for years while hiding behind respectability." He raised his glass, to seeing people clearly, to trusting what's proven rather than what's presented, and to families that prove worthiness through action rather than claiming it through words. They clinked glasses, and as Jonathan looked at the family sitting at his table, he felt something shifting in his chest. They weren't just employees anymore. They were people he'd fought to protect. People whose integrity he'd verified so thoroughly that he knew their character better than he knew most anyone's. Maybe, eventually they could become something more than employer and employees. But even if they didn't, Jonathan had learned the most important lesson: real trust isn't given blindly. It's earned through evidence and verified through testing. And Marcus had passed every test. Late autumn, 14 months after the first storm, brought cooler weather and subtle changes to Willow Springs. The estate transformation was dramatic. Buildings restored, gardens thriving, systems running efficiently. But the more significant transformation was happening between the people who lived there. Jonathan found himself seeking out Marcus's company beyond work discussions. They'd stand in the greenhouse while Marcus explained HVAC improvements, but the conversation would drift to Marcus's childhood, his father's lessons about integrity, the struggles of trying to provide for a family when systems seemed designed to keep you down. Jonathan listened more than he spoke, learning about experiences completely foreign to his world of inherited wealth and business connections. Marcus's description of being pulled over by police for driving while black in a nice car, of job applications ignored once employers saw his address, of the constant calculation of how to present himself to avoid triggering white fear. These things shocked Jonathan's comfortable assumptions about merit and opportunity. "I always believed hard work and skill were enough," Jonathan admitted one afternoon. "That successful people earned it and unsuccessful people simply didn't try hard enough. That's easy to believe when the system is designed to reward people like you, sir," Marcus said carefully. "I'm not saying you didn't work hard. I'm saying you didn't also have to work hard just to be seen as human enough to deserve basic respect. The honesty was uncomfortable, but Jonathan was learning to sit with discomfort rather than dismissing it. Keisha's relationship with the estate had evolved beyond professional housekeeping. She'd developed genuine affection for the property and what it represented. When she cleaned Margaret's sitting room or organized the library, she did it with reverence, understanding that she was caring for spaces that held decades of love and memory. One morning, Jonathan found her in Margaret's old craft room, crying softly while looking at a half-finished needlepoint project. "I'm sorry, sir," Keisha said quickly, wiping her eyes. "I was just organizing and found this. It's so beautiful and sad that she never finished it." Jonathan looked at the piece, a garden scene with intricate detail abandoned mid-flower when cancer made Margaret's hands too weak to hold the needle. "She loved that room," Jonathan said quietly. "She'd spend hours here creating things. After she died, I locked the door. Couldn't stand seeing her unfinished projects." Keisha looked at him carefully. "Would you want someone to finish it?" "I do needlework. I could complete it the way she designed it, as a way of honoring her." Something in Jonathan's chest cracked open. "You'd do that?" "I'd be honored to, sir. Beautiful things shouldn't stay unfinished just because the person who started them is gone. Their vision can still come to life." Over the following weeks, Keisha worked on Margaret's needlepoint in the evenings. She'd show Jonathan her progress, asking questions about Margaret's color preferences, her aesthetic choices. These conversations led to others about Margaret's life, her values, her dreams for the estate. One evening, Keisha said something that fundamentally shifted Jonathan's perspective. "Mrs. Margaret built this place to be full of life and purpose, didn't she? Not just beautiful but useful. A place that served the community, not just the people who owned it." "Yes," Jonathan said. "She organized charity events, hosted community gatherings, believed wealth came with responsibility to lift others." "Then the best way to honor her," Keisha said gently, "is to make this place live that purpose again. Not just maintain the buildings, but use them the way she intended." The idea took root. Jonathan began considering how to reopen the estate to community use, how to make it a resource rather than just a private sanctuary. But he needed help, and he knew exactly who could make it happen. In December, Jonathan called Marcus to his study with a new proposal. "Marcus, I want to expand your role beyond facilities management. I'd like to establish vocational training programs here at the estate. Use our workshop spaces to teach young people skilled trades: electrical, plumbing, carpentry, HVAC. You design the curriculum, recruit students, coordinate with local community colleges for certification." Marcus stared at him. "Sir, I'm not a teacher. You taught yourself advanced systems through determination and your father's guidance. You can teach others the same way. And Marcus, I specifically want you to target kids from backgrounds like yours. Kids the system has written off, who need skills and opportunity more than they need another lecture about pulling themselves up by bootstraps they can't afford." The vision was clear and compelling. Marcus felt excitement building. "That would be incredible. To give kids the kind of chance I never had at their age, then make it happen. I'll fund it, you'll design and run it." Over the winter months, Marcus developed a comprehensive program. He partnered with the local community college for certification credentials, recruited industry professionals to guest teach, and began accepting students. The first cohort of 15 young people, mostly Black and Latino kids from underfunded schools, started in January. Jonathan watched the program launch with satisfaction, but also with recognition. He was doing exactly what Margaret had always encouraged. Using resources to create opportunity, not just accumulate more wealth. One evening, he found himself telling Marcus about his estrangement from Emily, about the 3 years of silence, about his fear that he'd destroyed that relationship permanently. "You should call her," Marcus said simply. "You taught me that pride is something only people with full stomachs can afford. Maybe pride is also something only people with full families can afford. You have a daughter who deserves to know you've changed. What if she won't listen? What if she's moved on without me? Then you'll know you tried," Marcus replied. "My father used to say that regret for things you did eventually fades, but regret for things you didn't do lasts forever. At least if you call her, you'll have tried." The advice, simple and direct, gave Jonathan courage. That night, he dialed Emily's number for the first time in 3 years. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious, seeing his name on her screen. "Emily, it's your father.
Silence stretched across the line, so prolonged Jonathan wondered if she'd hung up. When she finally spoke, her tone was glacial. 3 years, Dad. 3 years of silence, and now you just call. I know, I have no excuse except that I was lost, and I'm trying to find my way back. I want to see you, I want to apologize, I want to try to fix what I broke between us. You broke more than something, Dad. You became a stranger. After Mom died, you disappeared into your work like I meant nothing. The pain in her voice was sharp and deserved. Jonathan forced himself to continue. You were right about everything you said 3 years ago. I did choose money and work over family. I did let grief turn me into something cold and inhuman. But Emily, something happened that made me see clearly for the first time since your mother passed. I want to tell you about it. In person, if you'll allow me. What happened? I met a family, Jonathan said simply. A father who had nothing but protected his family with everything he had. A mother who makes a home out of dignity and love. A child who sees truth that adults are blind to. They've been living at Willow Springs for over a year now, and they've reminded me of who I used to be, who your mother would have wanted me to be. He paused. They reminded me that I have a daughter who deserves better than what I've given her. Please, Emily, give me a chance to apologize properly. The silence this time was different, softer, considering. I'll come Saturday, Emily said finally, her voice trembling slightly. Afternoon. But Dad, I'm not promising forgiveness. I'm just promising to listen. That's all I'm asking for. That's more than I deserve. Saturday arrived with perfect winter sunshine. Jonathan was a nervous wreck, pacing the main house, second-guessing everything. Marcus noticed his employer's agitation while working on pool house winterization, and found Jonathan in the study around noon. Mr. Pierce, you all right? You've been wound up all morning. Jonathan explained about Emily's visit, about his fear that she'd take one look at him and leave, about not knowing if he could articulate how much he'd changed. Marcus listened thoughtfully. Sir, if I may speak freely, please. The man who picked us up in that storm isn't the man your daughter left 3 years ago. You're different now. You're here, you're present. You care about people beyond profit margins. Let her see that. Don't try to justify who you were. Show her who you've become. The advice steadied Jonathan. When Emily's Tesla pulled into the circular drive at 2 o'clock, he met her at the front door with his heart pounding. Hello, Emily. Hi, Dad. The formality was painful, but expected. Thank you for coming. Would you like to walk? The gardens are beautiful even in winter. Emily nodded and they walked the property paths in awkward silence initially. But as they passed the greenhouse where Marcus's students were working on a Saturday project, Emily's curiosity overcame her guardedness. What's happening there? That's a vocational training program Marcus started, teaching skilled trades to kids from underfunded schools. The estate provides the space and equipment. Marcus provides the expertise and mentorship. Marcus is the facilities director you mentioned on the phone. Yes. Come on, I'll introduce you. Inside the greenhouse, Marcus was demonstrating proper wiring techniques to 5 teenagers who were installing a new climate control system. He looked up as Jonathan and Emily entered. Marcus, this is my daughter, Emily. Emily, this is Marcus Washington, facilities director and the man who's teaching me what actually matters in life. The introduction was warmer than Marcus expected, almost familial. They shook hands and Emily studied Marcus carefully, seeing someone who clearly had Jonathan's respect. Your father tells me you started this program, Emily said, with his funding and support. Yes, ma'am. These kids are incredibly talented. They just need someone to believe in them and provide training the school system can't afford. As Emily watched the students work with obvious pride and focus, she began understanding something about her father's transformation. This wasn't abstract charity, this was personal investment in individual lives. Jonathan walked Emily through the estate, showing her the restored buildings, the thriving gardens, explaining how Marcus and Keisha had brought everything back to life. He took her to Margaret's sitting room, where the completed needlepoint now hung on the wall. Keisha finished that, Jonathan explained. She found it unfinished and asked if she could complete it as a way of honoring Margaret. I said yes, and she worked on it for months, asking me questions about Margaret's aesthetic choices, learning about her through her art. Emily studied the needlepoint, tears forming in her eyes. This is beautiful, and it's more than beautiful. It's someone caring enough about Mom's vision to bring it to completion. That's what Marcus and Keisha have done for this entire place, Jonathan said. They've brought Margaret's vision back to life. The estate as a place of purpose and community, not just private luxury. They sat in Margaret's garden, despite the cold, and Jonathan told Emily everything. The storm, the desperate family, his decision to stop, the careful testing period, the mistakes and growth, Richard's betrayal, and how Jonathan had chosen to verify rather than condemn. And through all of it, Jonathan said, his voice breaking, they taught me that wealth without purpose is just accumulation. That relationships require presence, not just proximity. That trust must be earned through consistent character, not demanded through authority or blood. He looked directly at Emily. They taught me that I failed you as a father when I chose grief and isolation over connection. That I dishonored your mother by abandoning everything she believed mattered. And Emily, I'm so deeply sorry for those lost years. You deserved a father who was present and engaged. Instead, I gave you emptiness and silence. The apology, raw and honest, opened something in Emily. She'd been preparing to maintain her walls to make him suffer as she'd suffered. But the man sitting beside her wasn't the cold corporate machine she'd left 3 years ago. This was someone genuinely transformed, genuinely remorseful. I was so angry at you, Dad, Emily said, tears flowing freely now. You had me, and you pushed me away like I was nothing. It felt like you blamed me for not being enough to make you want to live again. Oh God, Emily, no. Jonathan reached for her hands, holding them tightly. You were never the problem. I was. I failed you as a father. I failed your mother's memory by becoming exactly what she would have hated seeing. But Emily, I'm trying to be better. I can't undo those lost years, but I can try to be the father you deserve from this moment forward. They sat together in the winter garden, 3 years of hurt and loneliness settling between them, and slowly, tentatively, began building a bridge across the chasm that grief and pride had created. I'd like to meet them properly, Emily said finally. This family that gave me my father back. Jonathan arranged dinner that evening in the main house dining room, the first time he'd hosted a formal family meal in 7 years. Marcus, Keisha and Naomi joined Jonathan and Emily, and what could have been awkward became warm as the evening progressed. Emily watched how Jonathan interacted with them. She saw respect and affection that wasn't performative. She saw Naomi climb into Jonathan's lap during dessert without fear or formality, just a child comfortable with a beloved adult. She saw Keisha speak honestly to Jonathan about estate matters without deference or fear. She saw Marcus challenge Jonathan's opinion on community program design, and Jonathan listen with genuine consideration. These weren't employees being polite to a boss. These were people who'd formed real bonds through time and shared experience. After dinner, as Emily prepared to leave, she hugged her father for the first time in 3 years. This doesn't fix everything, Dad, she said softly. We have years of hurt to work through, but it's a start. A real start. A start is more than I deserve, Jonathan replied, his voice rough with emotion. I'll take it and be grateful. I'll come back next weekend, Emily promised. And Dad, I'd like to get to know Marcus and his family better. They're clearly important to you, and I want to understand why. As Emily drove away, Jonathan stood on the front steps watching her taillights disappear, feeling lighter than he had in years. Marcus approached from the side. How did it go, sir? Better than I hoped. She's coming back next weekend. Because of you and your family, I have my daughter back in my life. Marcus shook his head. No, sir. You have your daughter back because you found the courage to apologize and be honest. We just showed you it was possible to change. That's more than you know, Marcus. Jonathan turned to face him directly. And Marcus, stop calling me sir when we're alone. My name is Jonathan. The offer of first-name familiarity, after over a year of careful professional distance, was more meaningful than a bonus or raise. It was an acknowledgement that their relationship had evolved beyond employer-employee into something that resembled friendship. I'll try, Marcus said with a small smile. But it feels strange after all this time. So does having family for dinner, Jonathan replied. But strange can be good. Change can be good. I'm learning that slowly. They stood together on the front steps as winter stars appeared overhead, and for the first time in 7 years Jonathan felt like he was truly home. Winter turned to spring, and Emily's visits became regular occurrences. She'd come to Willow Springs on weekends, sometimes bringing David, the teacher she was dating, seriously. Jonathan welcomed David warmly, having learned not to judge his daughter's choices but to support them. The estate had become a genuine community resource. Marcus's vocational training program was thriving with a second cohort enrolled. Keisha had organized the estate's first community event since Margaret's death, a spring garden workshop, where local families learned about sustainable growing techniques. Jonathan stood on the porch watching children run across the lawn, their laughter filling spaces that had been silent for too long. He felt Margaret's presence in these moments, not as crushing grief, but as gentle approval. Everything seemed stable and growing, which is why what happened in late April was so devastating. Jonathan had been feeling tired for several weeks, which he attributed to age and the increased activity at the estate. But when he collapsed in his study one Tuesday morning, Marcus found him barely conscious and called emergency services immediately. At Piedmont Heart Institute in Atlanta, doctors stabilized Jonathan and ran comprehensive tests. Emily arrived within 2 hours, white-faced with fear. Marcus and Keisha came later that evening, uncertain if they belonged at the hospital but unable to stay away. The diagnosis came in stages, each worse than the last: severe coronary artery disease requiring surgery. But during pre-operative imaging, something else appeared: a mass on his pancreas. Further testing confirmed advanced pancreatic cancer, likely present for 8 months or more. It had metastasized to his liver. The oncologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, delivered the news with compassionate directness, while Emily, Marcus, and Keisha sat in his hospital room. "Mr. Pierce, the cancer is stage 4, with aggressive chemotherapy and radiation. We might extend your life by 12 to 18 months. Without treatment, you likely have 4 to 6 months. Jonathan absorbed this information with surprising calm. Perhaps after 7 years of half-living, death didn't frighten him as much as it might have. "What's my quality of life with aggressive treatment versus without, Dr. Chen was honest. Aggressive treatment will make you very sick. Nausea, fatigue, pain, cognitive impairment. You'd spend most of that year in hospitals or recovering from treatments. Without treatment, you'll have diminishing energy and increasing pain, but you'll be lucid and comfortable with proper pain management for most of the remaining time." Jonathan looked at Emily, whose face was wet with tears. He looked at Marcus and Keisha, sitting in the corner because they weren't sure if they were allowed to be closer. He thought about Margaret, about the 7 years he'd wasted, about the past 18 months of really living again. "I'm not doing aggressive treatment," he said firmly. "I'm 66 years old. I've lived long enough to know that quantity of time matters less than quality. I want to be present and lucid for my remaining months, not sick and suffering. I want to enjoy my family and see the programs at Willow Springs continue growing." "Dad, no," Emily protested. "We have to fight this. We have to try everything." Jonathan took her hand gently. "Sweetheart, I'm not giving up. I'm choosing how I want to spend the time I have left. I don't want to destroy my final months chasing an extra few weeks of suffering. I want to be your father, Marcus's friend, Naomi's grandfather figure. I want to be present, not absent in a haze of treatment." He turned to Dr. Chen. "Give me pain management and supportive care. Help me stay comfortable and functional as long as possible. But I'm done with aggressive interventions." The decision devastated everyone who loved him. Naomi cried for days when her parents gently explained that Mr. Jonathan was very sick and wouldn't get better. Keisha threw herself into caring for him with fierce dedication. Marcus quietly took over all estate business to relieve Jonathan of stress. But Jonathan refused to let his final months become a death watch. 6 weeks after the diagnosis, as his energy began noticeably declining, he called Marcus and Emily to his study at Willow Springs.
"We need to discuss the future of this estate," Jonathan began, his voice weaker but still authoritative. "Dad, you don't need to worry about this now," Emily protested. "Yes, I do. I've updated my will and I need you both to understand my decisions. He pulled out legal documents prepared by his new attorney, carefully vetted after Richard's betrayal. This estate, all 300 acres, the main house, the outbuildings and endowments for community programs, goes to Marcus and Keisha Washington. It's theirs, free and clear. The words landed like a thunderbolt. Marcus was stunned, speechless. Emily started to speak, but Jonathan raised his hand. Emily, you have your own substantial inheritance. The bulk of my corporate holdings, investment portfolio and liquid assets, after taxes and charitable bequests, approximately $800 million, you and David will never want for anything. He looked at Marcus. But Willow Springs belongs to the family that brought it back to life. Marcus, you resurrected this place with your work and vision. Keisha restored its warmth and purpose. This estate was dead before you arrived. It belongs to you now to carry forward what you and Margaret started. Jonathan, I can't accept this, Marcus said, his voice shaking. This is your family's heritage. Emily should have it. This is too much. Emily and I have discussed this extensively, Jonathan replied. Emily nodded confirmation, tears streaming down her face. She agrees that Willow Springs should go to the family that made it a home again. You've earned this, Marcus. Not through manipulation or flattery, but through honest work and genuine character demonstrated consistently over 18 months. He continued explaining detailed provisions. The vocational training program would receive full endowment funding in perpetuity. Keisha would receive a separate trust fund for estate management. Key employees would receive bequests. Multiple charities would benefit from large donations. But there's one more thing, Jonathan said, pulling out a final envelope. This is for you specifically, Marcus. To be opened after I die. It contains instructions for how I'd like you to use the resources I'm giving you. Not requirements, just requests from a friend. Over the following months, as Jonathan's health slowly declined, Willow Springs became a place of both sorrow and celebration. Jonathan spent his days doing what mattered most, being with people he loved. He had long conversations with Emily about her pregnancy. She and David were expecting a daughter. He gave her advice about parenting and apologized again for the years he'd wasted in isolation. He promised her that being a grandfather would have been his greatest joy, and made her promise to tell little Margaret about both her grandmothers and the grandfather who'd finally learned what mattered. He sat with Marcus in the workshop during training classes, watching young people learn skills that could transform their lives. This is legacy, Jonathan told him. Not money or property, but lives changed through opportunity and belief. He spent hours with Naomi in the gardens, teaching her about the plants Margaret had loved, sharing stories that kept his wife's memory alive. Naomi would read to him from her favorite books, and Jonathan would close his eyes and smile, grateful for every moment. On a perfect evening in early June, with roses blooming and the air sweet with honeysuckle, Jonathan gathered everyone for dinner in the formal dining room one last time. His energy was very low now, and the pain medication made him drowsy, but his mind was clear and his heart was full. Emily and David were there with newborn Margaret, barely a week old. Marcus and Keisha sat with Naomi, who'd just turned 9. Even Terrell had driven up with his family. The table was full of life and laughter and love. Jonathan looked around at these people who'd become his world and felt profound peace. I want to say something, he began, his voice soft but audible. When Margaret died, I thought my life ended. I spent 7 years as a ghost, building empires while my soul withered. I had everything money could provide, and nothing that mattered. He looked at Marcus. Then came a storm, and a desperate family on a dark road, and a choice that saved my life. Not theirs, mine. Every day since has been a gift I didn't think I'd experience again. Joy, purpose, family, love restored. His eyes glistened. The night I stopped for you, Marcus, I wasn't being noble, I was being selfish in the best way. I stopped because something in Naomi's face reminded me I was still human. You didn't just need rescuing. I needed it even more. You saved me. Keisha wiped tears from her eyes. We're the ones who were saved, Jonathan. You gave us everything. No, Jonathan said with absolute certainty, we saved each other. That's what real family does. We rescue each other, over and over through storms and betrayals and losses. We choose connection over safety, trust over suspicion, love over fear. He raised his wine glass with a trembling hand. To family, the ones we're born with and the ones we choose. To second chances and as many chances as it takes. to storms that force us to decide who we really are, and to love, which is the only thing that survives us when we're gone. They clinked glasses, tears flowing freely, love filling the room. Jonathan Pierce passed away peacefully 3 weeks later, in his bedroom at Willow Springs, surrounded by Emily, Marcus, Keisha, and the people he loved. His last words were to Marcus: "Thank you for being on that road that night. Thank you for letting me stop. Thank you for showing me how to live again." The funeral was held at Willow Springs, in the gardens Margaret had designed and Jonathan had helped restore. Over 600 people attended, filling the property with a mixture of grief and gratitude. Business leaders came to pay respects to a titan of industry. Community members came to honor the man who'd opened his estate to serve others. Vocational training students came to thank the billionaire who'd invested in their futures. And at the front, Marcus's family and Emily's family sat together, united in grief and love. Emily spoke about her father's transformation from distant workaholic to engaged parent and grandfather. "He taught me that it's never too late to change, never too late to apologize, never too late to choose love over pride. I got my father back because he found courage to admit he was wrong and humility to accept help from unexpected sources." Marcus spoke about second chances and the power of trust that's earned rather than assumed. "Jonathan gave my family an opportunity when we had nothing, but more importantly, he gave us respect and belief. He saw our potential when others saw only poverty. He judged us by our character when others judged us by our circumstances. And he remained loyal when tested by lies designed to destroy us. He taught me that real wealth isn't what you have, but what you give and who you become." Naomi, now 9, read a poem she'd written about gardens and kindness and how good people make things grow, bringing tears to everyone's eyes with her simple wisdom. The will reading was straightforward. Everything happened as Jonathan had explained. Willow Springs with full endowments went to Marcus and Keisha. Emily received the corporate empire and investment portfolio. Charities received substantial bequests. The vocational training program received permanent funding. But there was the sealed envelope, marked to be opened after my death. For Marcus Washington, Marcus opened it privately with Keisha and Emily present. Inside was a letter in Jonathan's handwriting, a key and legal documents. The letter read, "Dear Marcus, by now you own Willow Springs. I hope you'll maintain it with the same care and vision you've shown. But I have one final gift, and it comes with a request that I believe will honor both our legacies. In the climate-controlled garage, you'll find my Bentley Continental GT, the same car I was driving the night I found you. I've maintained it perfectly, and I want you to have it. Not to sell or display, but to use for a specific purpose. Here's my request: once a year on the anniversary of that first storm, drive that car at night through the rural roads of Georgia. Keep your eyes open for families in trouble, people in desperate circumstances, anyone who needs a miracle. Stop when others would drive past. Stop when caution tells you to keep going. There's a fund established for this purpose, managed through my attorney. $1 million endowed to generate annual income for highway mercy operations. Use it to help people the way we helped each other. Give them jobs if they have skills. Give them shelter if they're homeless. Give them hope when society has discarded them. Don't let anyone tell you that people in need don't deserve help, or that stopping for strangers is foolish. The world told me that picking up strangers was dangerous. The world told you that accepting help meant failure. The world was wrong about both of us. Prove it wrong again and again. Be the miracle someone is desperately praying for. I've also established the Jonathan and Margaret Pierce Foundation, with you and Emily as co-directors. Its mission provides second chance opportunities for people society has written off. Job training, housing assistance, education support, all managed with the philosophy that guided us. Judge people by their character and potential, not by their circumstances. Marcus, you gave me more than competent work. You gave me back my humanity, my family, my will to live. You taught me that stopping, trusting and believing in people's goodness isn't naive. It's the only thing that ultimately matters. Pass it forward. Be for someone else what I tried to be for you. Your friend always, Jonathan Pierce. P.S. Tell Naomi that the roses she planted with me are named in Naomi's hope. I've registered the cultivar in her name. Every year when they bloom, remember that from small seeds of kindness, beautiful things grow. Marcus read the letter aloud, his voice breaking multiple times. When he finished, the three of them sat in silence, processing this final gift and challenge. He wants us to pay it forward, Keisha said softly. It's more than that, Emily added. He's asking Marcus to carry on what Dad finally learned, that the greatest purpose is using whatever resources we have to lift others. Dad spent 40 years accumulating wealth. He spent his last 2 years learning to use it meaningfully. Marcus thought about that stormy night, about Jonathan's face when he'd rolled down the window, about the moment everything changed for both of them. Then that's what we'll do. We'll honor his memory by being the people he taught us to be. 5 years after Jonathan's death, Willow Springs had become more than anyone once imagined. Under Marcus and Keisha's leadership, with Emily's partnership and funding, the estate evolved into a nationally recognized center for workforce development and second chances. Its vocational programs now served 8 counties through satellite locations. Hundreds of graduates had moved into stable careers. Job placement remained above 90%, and several alumni had launched successful businesses of their own. The Jonathan and Margaret Pierce Foundation had grown into a major regional nonprofit, supporting housing stability, education and career development for people transitioning from poverty, addiction recovery, or incarceration. Emily and David ran the foundation full-time, while Marcus served as board chair. Naomi, now 14, was an honor student and a youth ambassador for the foundation. Inspired by her time with Jonathan, she had created a program teaching elementary students about gardening and environmental stewardship. Yet the most meaningful tradition was the annual Highway Mercy Drive. Each year on the anniversary of the storm that had changed everything, Marcus drove the Bentley Continental GT through the back roads of rural Georgia, watching for people in trouble. Some years he stopped, other years the roads stayed quiet, but he always went, always watched, always stayed ready. On the 5th anniversary, a rainy March night, his headlights caught a familiar sight, a young woman in her early 20s, standing beside a broken-down car, 2 small children in the back seat. She wasn't waving, just standing in the drizzle, defeated. Marcus pulled over. As he approached, he recognized the look immediately: desperation, exhaustion, the weight of believing you had failed. "Evening, ma'am. Looks like you could use some help." The woman, Rachel, broke down. Her car had died, her phone battery was gone, she had $23 left, and she was trying to reach Savannah, where a friend had promised to help her find work. Her children, 3 and 5, watched silently, wearing the same quiet fear Naomi once had. Marcus made a decision that would have seemed impossible 5 years earlier but now felt natural. "My name is Marcus Washington," he said. "I run a workforce development center about 2 hours from here. We provide job training, temporary housing, childcare support, and career placement. If you're willing to work hard and trust a stranger, I'd like to offer you an opportunity." Rachel stared at him. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Marcus smiled, thinking of Jonathan. "Because a stranger once stopped for my family when we had nothing. He taught me that the greatest purpose in life is being the miracle someone is praying for. Let me be that for you tonight." He explained Willow Springs. Rachel listened, hope and fear tangled together. "What do I need to do?" she asked. "Just say yes." As Rachel and her children climbed into the Bentley, Marcus thought of Jonathan sitting in that same seat years ago, making the same choice. The car smelled of leather and possibility. He called Keisha, who prepared housing. He texted Emily, who coordinated intake. The system Jonathan had envisioned came alive without hesitation. During the drive, Rachel's daughter pointed to a photo on the dashboard: Jonathan, Marcus, Keisha, and Naomi, in front of Willow Springs. "Who's that?" she asked. "That's the man who taught me to stop," Marcus said. He believed helping people wasn't naive. It was the point. Later, after settling the family, Marcus stood under the stars as Keisha joined him. "Jonathan would be proud," she said. "One choice," Marcus replied. "One moment of mercy. Look what it started." Inside, Emily worked in Jonathan's former study, now the foundation's offices. On the wall hung a portrait of Jonathan and Margaret, smiling. Beside it, a newer photo of the extended family, together, thriving. The inscription read,
Family isn't defined by blood but by the choices we make to love and lift each other. In her room, Naomi wrote in her journal, "When someone helps you, you help someone else. And it keeps going. That's legacy." The Bentley rested in the garage, ready for next year's drive. The gardens bloomed with Naomi's hope roses beside Margaret's originals, old and new growth intertwined. Willow Springs was quiet, but alive, because it was no longer just land or buildings. It was proof that wealth finds meaning when it lifts others, that trust can be rewarded, and that sometimes the people we rescue end up rescuing us. And on rainy nights, if you drive the back roads of Georgia with your eyes open, you might still see a Bentley moving slowly through the storm, looking for someone who needs a miracle. Because real legacy isn't what we leave behind, it's what we set in motion, and the motion never stops.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.